What if I told you that Dutch weather actually isn't that bad? Now, before I get into this video, I just want to preface this by saying that nobody on this planet, and especially nobody in this country, has complained about Dutch weather, especially off camera, more than I have. I have spent many days absolutely dreading going outside because the weather was absolutely miserable. And out of everything that I hear Dutch people complain about, this is by and large the #1 thing: the weather. And look, I'm gonna be honest with you, the weather here isn't particularly that great. It's not great unless you're into cloudy weather and rainy weather and cold weather, which very few people are, especially when you get all three of them at the same time and you're riding your bike in that kind of weather. But what I've personally found, and I'm not just saying this because it's a warm sunny day outside today, what I've personally found is that although the weather isn't particularly great here, at the very least, the negative aspects of the weather can be flipped into positives. So for example, it's winter right now, so the foliage is kind of non-existent, but because of all the rain, typically in the spring and the summer, in my experience, the natural environment becomes very lush, very green, especially in the heavily wooded areas. There's a lot of greenery, it's very lush, it's very aesthetically pleasing and calming to be around. And I imagine that this particular area of Gelderland that my girlfriend and I are currently residing in would be very beautiful in the spring and the summer. And I'm kind of sad that we won't get to be here to witness that. And then as for the wind, at the very least, although it can be very annoying to ride your bike in the wind, especially when you're going against the wind, okay, for some reason Dutch wind is always a headwind when you're riding your bike. I don't know why that is. It's always a headwind. But at the very least, Dutch people are able to use the wind to get clean and renewable energy. And that's why you see so many windmills here. So at the very least, you can take the wind and turn it into a positive. Even though it can be annoying, it's useful. It's a useful annoyance, as is the rain. As far as the cloudy weather goes, it's not really much you could do with that. But at the very least, for filming videos like this one, it makes it a lot easier for me. So from a personal standpoint, that's something that I can flip around into a positive. But given that here in the next 30 days, we're gonna be touching down back in Texas, in the midst of tornado season.
Welcome to Vassar.
Hello. I see people out here are very friendly. People are very friendly. But like I was saying, when we land back in Texas in the midst of tornado season, if we experience a tornado or any kind of severe thunderstorm, hail, things of that nature, which we very likely will, we're gonna be there for 3 months, there's really no use to that. There's no upside to severe weather. There's no upside to tornadoes. There's no upside to hail. There's no upside to severe thunderstorms. And just thunderstorms alone, I've noticed that there are very few of those here in the Netherlands. As a matter of fact, there's one instance that I can recall sometime in 2024. Maybe you remember what I'm talking about, because I'm pretty sure this only happened once last year. But I think it was raining particularly hard that day. Maybe there was a little bit of extra wind, but it wasn't anything too significant. To me, it was just a rainy day. Come to find out, they were calling for some sort of code orange. Now, I don't know exactly what code orange means, but to my knowledge, code orange means you have to stay inside. I think, correct me if I'm wrong in the comments, but they were calling for a code orange, stay inside, yada yada yada. In Texas, that was just a normal rainy day. And again, while natural disasters can be cool to watch on video or on occasion watch from a distance in real life, when it actually affects you, there is pretty much no upside to it at all. For example, my family actually moved to Texas from Louisiana because of Hurricane Katrina. You might or might not have known that, but that's the reason why I grew up in Texas in the first place. So I can tell you firsthand that although I'm glad I did grow up in Texas instead of Louisiana, in that initial moment when the hurricane actually hit and we came back to our house and saw this big hole in the front and mud all on the carpet, and we saw where the water had flooded our whole entire first story of our house, there was no upside to that. There was no way that that could have been spun into a benefit, especially for the collective good of society. Maybe we benefited from it privately, but overall, New Orleans still hasn't fully recovered from that. There's no upside to natural disasters. And here in the Netherlands, for as much rain and wind as we get, there are very few natural disasters. As a matter of fact, this year, I don't even think it really snowed. It didn't even really snow much this year. So I know there aren't blizzards because it doesn't actually get that cold here. And for some reason, when it's cold enough for it to snow, it doesn't rain. I don't know why that is. Maybe if you're a geologist or something, you can enlighten me on that. But don't see a whole lot of snow here. Generally speaking, again, there are just no natural disasters. Definitely don't have dust storms, volcanoes, earthquakes, things of that nature. The worst you might have is your occasional tornado, but by occasional, I mean occasional, maybe every few years. Whereas in Texas, it's pretty much an every year occurrence, which is why we have tornado season. Or in Louisiana, we had hurricane season. It's because it's to be expected. It's the rule, not the exception. And again, there aren't really that many ways that you can flip natural disasters into positives, or the wildfires in California. You can't really flip that into a positive. It just sucks. And all you can do is recover from it. But you also know that eventually it's probably going to happen again. Then you're going to have to rebuild all over again. Here in the Netherlands, that problem doesn't exist. It does not exist. And a big part of the reason why that problem doesn't exist, and again, I'm not a geologist, so don't quote me on this, but to my knowledge, a lot of times when you have these severe weather patterns, it's because of extreme fluctuations in temperature or moisture, just general fluctuations in the climate within short amounts of time. So, for example, if I see on the forecast that, and I'm going to speak in Fahrenheit because I still have trouble wrapping my head around Celsius, but you can look up the conversions for yourself. If I see on the forecast that in Dallas, the high for the day is, let's say, 80 degrees, and the low is 30 degrees, I know that there's a great chance that there is going to be a severe thunderstorm. Because when the heat and the cold front meet, that's going to create severe weather. Here in the Netherlands, temperatures tend to be very moderate. Everything is more flat, if you will. Not just from a geological standpoint with mountains and things of that nature, but in terms of the temperature, the fluctuations in temperature, if you look at it on a chart or a graph, it's flat. It's very predictable. And when it's predictable, you can prepare for it. And that's why the infrastructure here is so great. That's why you don't hear about a whole lot of flooding, for example. It's because it's predictable. So the Dutch engineers are able to work their magic to create infrastructure accordingly. Back home in Texas, for example, and Texas is kind of an extreme case of this, but in Texas, I mean, it's possible to experience a heat wave and an ice storm in the same year. And actually back in 2021, we had a situation where people died because it snowed really hard. Actually, I don't even think it just snowed. I think it was, again, an ice storm. So there's black ice on the roads, and we don't have snow plows because it's not something that we would expect to have on a yearly basis. And people got stuck without power and water, and they died. And it just was what it was. There was no upside to it again. These extremes in temperature, I believe, are difficult for somebody who hasn't experienced them to comprehend. So let me put things into perspective for you. In Texas, I do know this when it comes to Celsius. In Texas, it is not uncommon for it to reach 40 degrees every single summer. There is always going to be about a 3-week period where it reaches anywhere from 40 to maybe 45 degrees Celsius. Fahrenheit, that's probably around 100 to 110 degrees. Hot. Very, very hot. Let me not get hit by this car. But then, in the same place, it's also not uncommon every winter, maybe for a shorter amount of time, but every winter, it can get as low as negative 12 degrees, which is probably approaching the temperatures that you might see in a place like Norway or Sweden or Finland, somewhere like that. And again, when you have those kinds of temperatures and it rains or it snows, whatever, and we don't have snow plows, the whole entire place shuts down. This predictability in weather is what allows the Netherlands to not have to undergo situations like that, where all of a sudden people are just dying because they're ill prepared. And now it could be possible that moving forward with climate change, because climate change doesn't just affect Texas, it affects everywhere. It's just that in places that are more susceptible to extreme weather patterns, they're going to experience it first, and they're going to experience it much more extensively. It is possible that as things begin to heat up, and with the general lack of air conditioning that I've noticed here in the Netherlands, you could start seeing situations where, especially elderly people who are vulnerable and immobile, might start to die or be in great danger in those kinds of situations. But at the very least, if that becomes the new norm, it's something that Dutch people can prepare for and act accordingly. In other words, it can make air conditioning more normal. It can normalize air conditioning. There's not really much you can do about tornadoes. And just general extremes in weather patterns and temperature fluctuations, I mean, that's not really something that you can prepare for. You can expand your wardrobe, you can do this and that, but when we think about how that affects, I think I just walked in a circle, I don't know. Let me know in the comments if I just walked in a circle. I'm just walking aimlessly right now, but I mean, aside from the personal effects, when you think about how it affects the infrastructure, you see these roads right here. The roads are very smooth, and I don't really see a whole lot of road construction going on in the Netherlands. It's not a coincidence. It's because the weather patterns tend to be much more predictable and much less extreme. And when you have much lower fluctuations in the weather patterns, the infrastructure tends to last longer. So there's sort of this ripple effect of quality of life improving in every different aspect simply because of the predictability in weather patterns and the more moderate temperatures. Because let me tell you, when I realized that here in the Netherlands, you can still wear jackets in the summer, my mind was absolutely blown. Because back home, if you wear a jacket in the summer, you'll probably die. And that's no exaggeration. If you go outside in Texas in that 40-degree weather with a jacket on, you're probably gonna die. If you're out there for more than 15, 20 minutes. But here, and again, I'm speaking in Fahrenheit here, but you can look up the conversions for yourself. What I found is that the normal summer temperature, I did just walk in a circle and go this way, but the normal summer temperature is generally closer to 70 degrees Fahrenheit, which is very pleasant. And I feel like it doesn't rain as much in the summer either. So summers are a beautiful time out here. Of course, it will be a little bit nicer with air conditioning, but it's tolerable even without it. And it's very nice to be outside in the lush green environment with that kind of weather and with this kind of infrastructure.